The morning sun peeked over the rooftops as the yellow school bus rolled quietly through the neighborhood. Its headlights flickered off as it turned onto a familiar street lined with sleepy houses and neatly trimmed lawns. Birds chirped overhead, and the air was crisp with the promise of a new day. The bus driver, Mr. Thomas, a kind-eyed man in his 50s with graying hair and a warm voice, slowed the bus to a gentle stop at the corner where the tall oak tree cast long shadows over the sidewalk. The usual crowd of kids stood waiting, laughing, jostling, slinging backpacks over their shoulders. Mr. Thomas smiled and greeted them cheerfully as the door whooshed open. "Good morning, Marcus." "Morning, Jenny." "Hey there, champ," he called out as the students climbed aboard, each offering a quick nod or a grin in return. Amid the noisy shuffle of feet and chatter, one small figure lingered at the back of the group. She was a thin girl, probably around 10 years old, with long, dark hair that hung like a curtain around her face. Her backpack was old and faded, one strap repaired with duct tape. Unlike the others, she didn't smile or wave. Her head remained bowed as she climbed the steps, eyes glued to the floor. Mr. Thomas noticed the way her shoulders seemed to shake, her sleeve brushing across her cheek as if she were wiping away tears. He furrowed his brow but said nothing. She walked straight to the middle of the bus and slid into her usual seat by the window. As the bus began to move again, Mr. Thomas glanced up into the rearview mirror. The girl sat curled inward, forehead pressed to the glass, silently watching the world roll by. Her lips trembled. A single tear slipped down her cheek. The other kids were oblivious, too busy talking and joking to notice. But Mr. Thomas saw it all, and his heart sank. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The days began to blur together, each morning unfolding almost exactly like the last. Mr. Thomas drove his route with practiced ease, turning down the same streets, stopping at the same corners, and greeting the same group of students. But every morning, without fail, his eyes would search for her, the quiet girl with the worn backpack and the sad eyes. And every morning, she would appear, standing a few steps behind the others, her gaze fixed on the ground, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if bracing against more than just the morning chill. She climbed the steps slowly, her movements stiff, like someone carrying invisible weight. Mr. Thomas tried to catch her eye each day, offering her a kind smile or a gentle, "Good morning." But she never responded, never looked up. Her hair always fell like a curtain, shielding her face from the world. He began to notice the small things, the redness around her eyes, the way she clutched her backpack to her chest, and how she always sat alone in the same seat, staring out the window as if hoping to disappear into the passing scenery. Other students paid her no mind. They were too wrapped up in their own lives, sharing TikTok videos, arguing over sports, whispering about homework. But Mr. Thomas noticed. He saw how her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching, how sometimes she mouthed words under her breath like a silent cry for help. A few times, he thought he saw her flinch at loud laughter or sudden movement nearby. Each day, after dropping the children off at school, Mr. Thomas felt a growing sense of unease. Something wasn't right, and it was more than just a child having a rough morning. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern, a silent cry, repeated day after day. He found himself thinking about her long after his route ended, wondering what could be troubling her so deeply. As the days passed, his concern grew heavier. He knew he had to pay closer attention. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going away on its own. One quiet afternoon, after finishing his last drop-off and parking the bus in the depot lot, Mr. Thomas sat alone in the driver's seat, staring out the windshield. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting golden light across the empty parking lot. The laughter and chaos of the morning seemed like a distant memory now. But his mind wasn't at ease. The image of the little girl sitting silently by the window, her eyes swollen and red, haunted him more with each passing day. Something was deeply wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling. He finally stepped off the bus and walked toward the small office near the maintenance shed where a few other drivers were gathered. They were sipping coffee, swapping stories, and laughing about some mix-up on a different route. But Mr. Thomas wasn't in the mood for light conversation. He approached one of the older drivers, Linda, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a soft heart. She had been driving school buses for over 2 decades and had seen just about everything. "Hey, Linda," Mr. Thomas said quietly, pulling her aside. "Can I ask you something?" She looked at him curiously. "Sure, what's up?" "There's this girl on my route," he began, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's been crying every morning. Doesn't talk to anyone. Sits alone. It's been going on for at least a week now. Maybe more." Linda's face turned serious. "Every day." He nodded. "Every single day. I tried talking to her, but she won't say a word. Just stares out the window. She looks scared, maybe even hurt." Linda sighed, her expression softening. "Kids go through things, Tom. Sometimes it's school, sometimes it's home. But if it's this consistent, something deeper's going on. I don't want to overstep," he said. "But I can't just ignore it either." "You shouldn't," she replied firmly. "But be careful. Don't do anything that might scare her more. Just keep your eyes open. And maybe mention it to the school counselor." "Mr. Thomas nodded slowly. Her words made sense, but they didn't ease the knot in his stomach. He knew he had to be careful, but he also knew one thing for certain: this wasn't something he could let go. Something was wrong, and he was going to find out what. The next morning, Mr. Thomas drove his usual route with a quiet intensity. The familiar streets passed by in a blur, but his focus was sharp, his mind on one thing only: the girl. She boarded the bus just like always, trailing behind the others with that same defeated posture. Her eyes were puffy, and her face looked even paler than before. She didn't speak, didn't glance at anyone. She simply walked to her usual seat by the window, slid in, and curled herself into the corner, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Mr. Thomas tried not to stare, but it was hard not to worry. She looked so small, so fragile, like a bird trying to make itself invisible. The bus filled with laughter, conversations, and the usual morning noise, but none of it seemed to touch her. When they reached the school, the doors folded open, and the kids spilled out into the parking lot, shouting goodbyes and racing toward the building. She stood slowly, gripping her backpack tightly, and shuffled off the bus without a word. As soon as the last student disappeared inside, Mr. Thomas sat still for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, he put the bus in park, stood up, and walked slowly down the aisle. His boots thudded softly on the rubber floor. He paused beside her usual seat, looking around to make sure no one was watching. He bent down carefully and peeked under the bench. At first, he saw nothing but dust and the usual debris: an old pencil, a gum wrapper, and a half-crushed juice box. But then, something caught his eye. Tucked deep into the corner under the seat, barely visible in the dim light, was a small, crumpled piece of paper wedged tightly between the seat frame and the floor. He reached for it, fingers brushing over the rough paper as he pulled it free. It was a page torn from a notebook. The edges were frayed, and the paper was damp, possibly from tears. His eyes scanned the shaky handwriting, words written in pencil, smudged and uneven: "Please help me. I don't feel safe. He watches me every day. I don't know what to do." Mr. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the message, stunned. His heart pounded as a chill ran through him. This wasn't just sadness. This was fear, real fear. And now he knew, this little girl wasn't just quietly suffering. She was reaching out, whispering for help in the only way she knew how. Mr. Thomas stood frozen in the aisle, the torn note trembling in his hand. The words repeated themselves in his mind like an alarm he couldn't shut off: "Please help me. I don't feel safe. He watches me every day." His fingers tightened around the paper, his breath shallow as his mind raced. Who was he? A student? A neighbor? Someone at home? The possibilities turned his stomach. The quiet, shy girl with the sad eyes had been crying out for help, and until now, he hadn't seen the full picture. He carefully folded the note and slipped it into his shirt pocket, then knelt down to check under the seat more thoroughly. His hands brushed against the metal frame and the dusty floor, searching every crevice. Tucked near the back, nearly hidden between the seat leg and the wall, was something else, another scrap of paper. This one wasn't crumpled, but folded neatly, like someone had taken their time. He opened it slowly, bracing himself. The message was even more chilling: "He told me not to say anything. But I'm scared. I don't sleep at night. I think he's following me. Please don't tell." Mr. Thomas's throat tightened. These weren't just scattered thoughts. These were warnings. Cries from a child living in fear, left in secret under a bus seat because she had no other safe space. He sat back on his heels, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him like a mountain. This wasn't just about one sad little girl anymore. This was something serious, something dangerous. He rose slowly and walked to the front of the bus, glancing again in the rearview mirror, imagining her sitting there just an hour earlier, silently suffering while the world moved on around her. How many people had missed the signs? How many more days would she have endured this alone if he hadn't looked? He climbed out of the bus and strode purposefully toward the school building, his steps firm now, his mind made up. There was no more guessing, no more hoping things would get better on their own. He had proof, and someone needed to act, immediately. Inside the office, he asked to speak with the school counselor. His voice was calm but urgent as he explained the situation and handed over the notes. The counselor's face changed instantly from polite interest to grave concern. She took the papers, read them, and without hesitation, picked up the phone. As Mr. Thomas stood there, watching the staff spring into action, a sense of dread still sat heavy in his chest. But beneath it, something else stirred, relief. Finally, the silence had been broken. The school counselor's office was usually a place of calm, a warm, softly lit room with posters about kindness on the walls and a shelf full of board games meant to comfort anxious students. But today, the atmosphere was tense. The moment she read the handwritten notes Mr. Thomas had brought in, her expression shifted from concern to urgency. She placed the papers carefully on her desk, picked up the phone, and began dialing numbers without hesitation. Her voice, though steady, was tight with focus as she contacted the principal first, then the district child welfare liaison. Mr. Thomas sat in a chair near the door, hands resting on his knees, eyes on the floor. He had never imagined himself in this kind of situation. Driving a bus was supposed to be simple, safe pickups and drop-offs, a routine he'd followed for years. But now, he found himself in the middle of something far more serious than tardy students or rowdy behavior. A child was in danger. And he was the one who had found the signs. Within minutes, the principal entered the office, followed closely by a school social worker. They reviewed the notes carefully, speaking in hushed tones. The counselor explained what Mr. Thomas had told her, the repeated crying, the girl's withdrawn behavior, and how he found the messages hidden beneath the seat. Every word made the situation feel more real, more urgent. They all agreed, this couldn't be ignored. Shortly after, the school resource officer, a calm and compassionate man named Officer Daniels, arrived. He was trained to handle sensitive situations involving children and had dealt with similar cases in the past. After reviewing the notes, he nodded solemnly. "We need to talk to her. Gently. Privately. And we need to make sure she's safe in the meantime." They contacted the girl's classroom teacher and arranged for her to be pulled aside discreetly. The plan was careful and respectful. They didn't want to scare her or cause a scene. The counselor and Officer Daniels waited in a small, quiet meeting room as the teacher brought the girl in. She entered hesitantly, clutching her backpack tightly, eyes darting around nervously. The counselor knelt beside her, speaking softly, offering reassurance and kindness. "You're not in trouble. We just wanted to talk. You're safe here. We care about you." At first, the girl said nothing. She sat with her head down, hands twisting in her lap. But then the counselor gently placed the folded note on the table, the one Mr. Thomas had found. The girl's eyes flicked toward it, and in that moment, something changed. Her shoulders began to shake, and tears welled up in her eyes. Slowly, like a dam breaking, she began to talk, halting at first, then in a flood of words and sobs. She spoke of fear, of someone who had been watching her, threatening her. Someone she couldn't escape from. She didn't name him at first, but the pieces began to come together. Her voice cracked as she admitted how scared she was every day, how the bus was her only place to hide, and how she thought no one would believe her. Everyone in the room listened quietly, heartbreak visible on their faces. Mr. Thomas stood just outside the doorway, unable to hear the words but feeling every ounce of the emotion. His hands clenched at his sides. He had done the right thing. But it didn't feel like enough, not yet. The counselor gently assured the girl that she would be protected, that she wasn't alone anymore. Steps would be taken. Her parents would be contacted. Child Protective Services would be informed. The fear she had carried alone for so long was finally being shared, and the adults around her were finally listening. The air inside the small conference room felt heavy, filled with a quiet tension that lingered even after the girl had finished speaking. Her words had come slowly at first, like she wasn't sure if she was truly safe, but once she started, the truth poured out, raw, painful, and deeply unsettling. She spoke in a whisper, voice trembling as she described the man who had been watching her. Not a stranger, as some might expect, but someone close. A relative who lived in her home. Someone who was supposed to care for her but instead made her feel afraid every single day. The adults in the room didn't interrupt. They listened, their expressions serious but gentle. Officer Daniels took careful notes, his calm demeanor never wavering. The counselor stayed close to the girl, reassuring her with quiet words and a soft hand on her shoulder. She kept repeating that she was safe now, that she had done the right thing by speaking up. Mr. Thomas stood just outside, leaning against the wall, his heart aching as he listened to the muffled voices and occasional sniffles from within. He couldn't hear the details, but he didn't need to. The look in the girl's eyes earlier had said it all. Eventually, the girl fell silent, emotionally drained. She sat there, shoulders slumped, fingers curled tightly around the sleeves of her shirt. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the counselor gently asked if there was anything else she wanted to say. The girl hesitated, then shook her head. She looked so small in that chair, but there was something different in her now, a flicker of relief, like a burden had finally been lifted from her tiny shoulders. The next steps moved quickly. The school contacted Child Protective Services, who confirmed they would send someone out immediately. The principal reached out to the girl's mother, requesting a meeting without explaining the full situation over the phone. It was crucial to handle everything carefully to ensure the girl's safety until the authorities could intervene. A plan was quietly put into place to keep her at school until she could be released into safe custody. She would not be going home on the bus that day. Mr. Thomas was eventually called back into the room. The girl looked up at him with tired, watery eyes. He gave her a gentle smile, one hand pressed to his chest in a silent gesture of support. "You're really brave," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." She didn't say anything, but her lips curled into the smallest, most fragile smile. That was all he needed. As she was led to a private room to rest and wait for the caseworker, the staff worked around her with care. Everything was done quietly, respectfully, with no loud announcements or dramatic scenes. No other students knew what was happening. It was a delicate situation, but for the first time, the girl was surrounded by people who were protecting her instead of ignoring her pain. Mr. Thomas walked back to his empty bus later that afternoon, his steps slow, his mind still processing everything. The seat where the girl had always sat seemed different now. No longer just a place on a school bus, it had become the first safe space she'd found, the first place she felt heard. And all because she had dared to leave a small note. And because someone had cared enough to look. The late afternoon sun bathed the bus yard in a soft golden light as Mr. Thomas sat alone behind the wheel, the hum of distant traffic barely reaching his ears. The engine was off, the kids had all gone home, and yet he remained, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes lost in the empty aisle. The same aisle where she used to walk quietly, slipping into that seat by the window like a shadow. Today, that seat remained empty, and somehow it felt heavier than ever. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, his thoughts spiraling. Everything that had happened in the last 24 hours played in his mind like a film. The girl's tears, the hidden notes, the hushed conversations in the school office. The bravery it must have taken for her to write those desperate words. And how close he had come to missing it all. Just one more overlooked cry, and she might have slipped through the cracks like so many others. But she hadn't. Because he had looked. He had noticed. As the sunlight dimmed and shadows stretched long across the seats, a knock on the bus door startled him. He turned to see the school counselor standing outside, her expression kind, though tinged with fatigue. He opened the door, and she climbed aboard, her footsteps soft against the floor. "She's safe," the counselor said quietly, taking a seat across from him. CPS placed her with a temporary family today. Her mother didn't know what was happening, she was shocked, devastated. But she's cooperating fully. Mr. Thomas nodded, his throat tightening. "Is she okay?" The counselor offered a faint smile. "She's scared, of course. But she knows now that she's not alone. And she asked me to tell you something. He looked up, eyes searching hers. She said, tell him thank you, for seeing me. For a moment, Mr. Thomas couldn't speak. He stared ahead, blinking. Rapidly as a wave of emotion surged through him. He wasn't a hero. He was just a bus driver, a man who drove kids to school and home again. But today, he had been something more. He had been the one person who noticed when no one else did. I'm glad she's safe, he finally said, voice rough. That's all that matters. The counselor gave a quiet nod and stood to leave, pausing at the steps. It matters because you paid attention. That seat, she glanced back toward the now empty bench by the window, became her refuge. That ride to school, it gave her time to gather courage. You gave her that. As the door folded closed behind her and her footsteps faded away, Mr. Thomas sat in silence. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, and the sky was streaked with hues of orange and violet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, the original note. He'd kept it, not as evidence, but as a reminder. He looked at it for a long moment before carefully placing it in the glove compartment. Then he turned back to the driver's seat, resting his hands once more on the wheel. Tomorrow, he would run the route again. A new day, a new ride. But he would never forget the girl with the quiet tears and the courage to whisper for help. And he would never stop looking.